So I have like the classic immigrant story. Like we used to live in Lebanon, and then like we immigrated to Canada, and like when you get there, my dad works like 15 hours a day. My mom stays at home, takes care of the kids. A new culture, a new everything. And like the one thing an immigrant family doesn't want is like for their kid to pursue like entrepreneurial ventures.
Welcome to the Swisspreneur Show, a podcast about startup stories and learnings from experienced entrepreneurs. Here's your host, Sylvan.
Bassil, a very well welcome to the Swisspreneur Show. It's a pleasure to have you here today.
I'm happy to be here.
You're the co-founder at Ernie, a simple automated payroll for startups and SMEs based here in Switzerland. But you actually grew up in Canada and studied business administration and economics there. Then, not long after finishing your master's, you then moved to Denmark to sell online magazine subscriptions. So I wonder, how was the culture shock going from Canada to Europe? How was that like for you?
Yeah, I mean, Denmark was okay, right? From a culture shock perspective, I wasn't moving to like Beijing or somewhere like that, so that was okay. But I was also much more receptive to it, right? So when I left Canada to come to Denmark, like if you're receptive to that environment, there's less of a shock. I'd say the bigger shock actually came when, like in the startup itself, like when I joined the kind of starting to sell online magazines, that like early stage startup environment. There were like 6 people. Man, that was I would say a bigger shock than actually going to Denmark. I'd been in internships before in the past in Canada, but yeah, that was a shock, I would say.
In what way?
Yeah, I mean, like it was just like chaotic, right? There was just no structure, there was no framework, and I joined. So my job there was like to sell like online magazines, and like I mean, you yourself know, right? I think like I'm a big fan of every founder should probably have some kind of a sales job at some point.
Fully agree. Yeah.
Like because it's just like you learn so much. And typically, like, so you get in there, there's no framework, and we're basically just trying to, like, identify, right, like, the customer profile, the messaging, all that is, like, shaky, the channels, and, like, you're talking to customers, they're, like, saying, I don't want to talk to you, or you're sending emails, you're not getting a response, and so that, like, learning process of, like, identifying the go-to-market and what sales should be was, like, just a shock to me. I'd been in other companies where the sales process was kind of already set up. So they identified all that, right? Like customer profile. And so they would just hire people to basically just double down on that framework. And just the early stage startup, it's like the product's still being built and they're still kind of like identifying the customers and the channels and all that. And that was like, that to be in that environment was like, and to be in Denmark was a definite, was an adventure. Let's put it that way.
I can imagine.
Yeah, man.
But certainly also good preparation for where you ended up after. We're going to talk about that in a second. But before you then came to Switzerland, you actually also spent a lot of time working as a consultant in the freight industry. So that's quite different from the startup world or the magazine subscription world. So what actually captivated you in the freight industry?
Yeah, definitely. So after Denmark, I got a pretty good gig in the Nordic countries. So I was working with the CEO of DHL Nordics, and then on top of that too, I was doing consulting work for the freight industry. What like was really interesting in the freight and logistics industry is actually the traveling aspect to it. So like in that period, like I'd paid maybe 8 years of being a consultant, I basically traveled to like 60, 70 countries. Wow. And just like various conferences, various meetings with different people. And like that was like the real, I'd say, captivating part of being freight and logistics industry. I mean, that's just like, there's also a downside, it's like archaic. It's a bit like old school, I would say, the way to do things. A lot of paper, a lot of fax machines still, like, those are still very relevant in the industry, believe it or not. So there's that downside to it, but the traveling was just, totally worth every minute of like being in the industry.
Nice.
Yeah.
And then, we're going to talk about your startup in a second, but then you actually chose the startup way. So where does your entrepreneurial drive come from? Do you have any entrepreneurs in your family or any role models that you looked up to?
Man, no, I mean, there's not too many entrepreneurs in my family. So I have like the classic immigrant story. Like we used to live in Lebanon, and then like we immigrated to Canada, and like when you get there, my dad works like 15 hours a day. My mom stays at home, takes care of the kids. A new culture, new everything, and like the one thing an immigrant family doesn't want is like for their kid to pursue like entrepreneurial ventures. They want them to get an education, get a normal job. Just go 9 to 5, don't do anything mad. Yeah. Take it easy, So when you want to kind of pursue maybe more of a riskier, I'd say, path, it's definitely like it's a harder sell, right? To your family, I would say. So not too. So from a family perspective, I would say not too much entrepreneurial spirit there, not too much drive there. I'd say entrepreneur wise, yeah. I mean, like just like some of the guys, obviously, I started to follow in the early days. So maybe like 2008, 2007 is like when I started to really like kind of really maybe understand a little bit what entrepreneurs meant and what they wanted to do. I was like following guys like Reed Hastings from Netflix. I was pretty obsessed with. Obviously, like Elon was like just coming out then with Tesla, just kind of went public. So there's a lot of like fascination there. So I would say like just like looking at these guys and kind of what they were doing and the fact that they were doing something that was like really hard. I don't know. That was like really, really interesting to me. I would say that's kind of my drive. And I also had, I'd say, a missed opportunity. So like I had launched a venture in like, I didn't even know it was venture. It was like in 2009, 2010. And I had launched this like education venture. So like basically like we were in school and we'd get these assignments and we'd meet up at the library and like to do the assignments together. And like we'd like, call each other, be like, hey, listen, like when can we go there? When are you going to be there? When can I meet you? And there was always guys about showing up. And so a friend of mine, Robin, and I, we built this like just prototype like app where basically you could upload the assignment and we could just like do it online. Hold on, so I didn't even know what we had at the time. It was called Cope Learn, so it's still online, COOP Learn. And you'd upload the assignment and we'd kind of work on it like just together. And then eventually one guy's like, hey, I have a couple past exams. Can I upload those? So we uploaded those. And then so anyway, we started to snowball a little bit. We had about like 2,000 users on it at one point. Yep. And then we opened, there's like articles written about us in like student newspapers across the US and like Canada. And like we just didn't know what we had. Like we didn't nurture it. We didn't do anything with it. And it just kind of like fizzled out. And now it's like still live, just out of like nostalgia reasons. It's crazy, man.
Yeah, now I understand the missed opportunity. So you didn't want to get into that situation a second time.
Yeah, definitely not. Yeah.
I briefly want to talk about your situation with your parents, sort of also that expectation that you would need to get a good education, then probably go for a corporate job that is safe, secure, you have a good income. Yeah. How do you convince them that the entrepreneurial path is actually also a good alternative? Was that very difficult for you to convince them?
I mean, I don't think you ever do. So, I mean, I think like until you sell a company for like $1 billion, I don't know if you ever do, man. I would say like eventually they just become numb to it and they just kind of support you, I would say. Yeah. But there's so many stories like that of like, immigrant parents and like a lot of like founders and like successful entrepreneurs actually are immigrants. They have this like weird drive to want to like excel beyond whatever like the establishment or the status quo is. So, yeah, I don't think you ever do, man. I just think you continue to just like grind it, and then eventually maybe you have a huge exit, and then they just like they're convinced by it, or they just become numb.
But it's not that you have difficult conversation with your parents. You just probably skip it.
Yeah, exactly. We just kind of like brush over it. They're like, this is my daughter. She's like an amazing musician. That's my son. You just keep on this.
Fair point. So then it was actually in 2021 when you then came to Switzerland, and you ran into the problem which eventually created Ernie. So in the first place, why do you actually come to Switzerland? That's a very interesting path. Lebanon, Canada, Denmark, and then Switzerland. I know all the red and white in the flags, but what is it really that brought you to Switzerland? Yeah,
so honestly, I did also a period in Silicon Valley. So before I came to Switzerland, I was actually in Silicon Valley with my wife there, and we'd been there for like 4.5 years. And like we just got to a point where we wanted to raise a family, and my wife is Dutch. And so she just like misses the European like living, just the lifestyle living in Europe.
Right.
And in the lifestyle in California, unfortunately, like had, I don't know, downgraded. I mean, you've heard of it for sure. A lot of the guys started to move to Austin. Now Miami's a real hot spot. And so they just started to downgrade. And so we ended up basically moving to, so my wife basically wanted to move maybe first to the Netherlands, maybe where she's from. She looked in the UK, and then eventually she got a job with UBS. So then we just kind of like packed our bags and came back to Europe. And yeah, personal reasons why we came to Switzerland. For now. Yeah, exactly.
So you also have a co-founder at Ernie. His name is Daniel. How do you actually meet each other?
Yeah. So I used to basically be an advisor for a company called Lucabox. So they're like a startup here, and I'm an investor in them as well. And I used to like lead their product team for a bit. So I was like an interim product lead when we were looking for one. And then when we were hiring a CPO who kind of replaced me in I think it was, March, whatever. He eventually replaced me. Basically, I was like looking for a great product guy, right? So some guy to really complement my skills, maybe as a sales guy or as a CEO. And I kind of just asked Luke about, hey, can I get a look at like the CVs that you guys went through? Like, who were the CPO candidates? So I started to go through that. That was like first I went through like 50, 60 of them. And then eventually like I found one with Daniel, who's like my co-founder. And I saw his profile, and he just like ticked a lot of the boxes on paper. Mm-hmm. So he had like Bexio experience building products. He then went to Finova. He kind of had experience in the finance and SME space. So he ticked off a ton of boxes on paper, right? So then, but I'm super skeptical on paper. And then like I had first conversation with him went pretty well. Then a few more, and then eventually I had one conversation that I would say that was like the real tipping point. And I had conversations with other candidates as well. But there was like one conversation that was a real tipping point with Dan. It was like, he just like was like super honest with what we were saying about personal stuff. So he started talking about like family, personal stuff, like his situation is like close family as well as kids. So he started talking about some real personal topics with me. And I felt like that was like the tipping point. Like none of the other candidates would go that deep with me, and they're all very skilled. Mm-hmm. But that like honest touch, I think, like really resonated with me and was made it a no-brainer. And that was kind of like how I based my decision at the end of the day.
So it was really this openness, this honest personal share that built trust, and then we said, hey, we could actually start a company together. Totally.
Because that's what you want, right? Because you're going to go through the bad times with your co-founder. Like you're going to go through some really dark times. And you don't want a guy who's like lying to you or a guy who maybe is like trying to hide something from you. You want it all on the table, and you want to be accepting, and you want to do vice versa, right? Me, myself, I want to be honest with Dan sometimes and say, listen, like it's not working out. I'm having a rough day. Let's call it a night. And you got to, that same kind of reciprocal honesty has to happen. And and that's kind of like the kind of guys, that's the kind of guys not only I look for Dan as a founder, but also as like this, and you want to hire actually. That's kind of what you want. Like you want the ugly. You want to know the ugly before you hire them. Otherwise, it's going to get really ugly. Yeah. So, and we've made some hiring mistakes. I'm not saying we're perfect.
I mean, I think we've all been there, right?
Yeah.
This is part of the game.
Yeah, exactly.
But how did then really the idea of Ernie come around? Like you were already looking for a co-founder, so to speak. So you had to look at the CVs. So for you, it was already clear that, hey, this is the problem that I want to tackle. Can you talk a bit more about the early days, how you then went from idea to the actual company foundation?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so like the problem was pretty evident. So I used to live in California. There I was a temp CFO. So basically I worked with like startups in the area and like I used a range of different software tools. Mm-hmm. So I used like Gusto is one of them. You probably are aware of it. There's a few other Expensify, QuickBooks, a lot of them. And then like when I came to Switzerland with my wife, the idea was like maybe I just do this, maybe I just open up a firm here and I could like service the startups and the the SME community here with whatever the software offerings here are in Switzerland. So I can't use any of those US-based products here, right?
Doesn't work, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Very localized. So when I was looking at the products here, I saw like a significant like. So I don't want to knock the products here in Switzerland. All right, they're good. Okay, but definitely there is definitely a difference between I'd say U.S.-based SME products from what German, especially in the finance space from my time in the U.S. versus the ones in Switzerland. Okay. Yeah. And the one area that I saw the greatest gap, and the one area I saw a gap that no one was covering was payroll specifically. So I saw like Yoko covering the expense reporting space, like Leggy was doing cap table management. There's a couple guys trying to do kind of bookkeeping and stuff, like EasyCount was trying to do. I think there's a couple of us coming. Numarix now is doing a great job there as well. So a lot of the spaces were covered, or was going to be covered, right? They were building towards it. So I said, I'm not going to waste my time. But the one space no one was kind of tackling was really this payroll space. Yeah. And that's kind of like what I'd say prompted the endeavor. Then I started talking to the community, like accountants. I went to I mentioned earlier, Blue Lion pretty much. So I talked to guys who maybe tried to crack it in the past. And then also like guys who maybe had the same vision as me, but didn't pursue it. And then just trying to piece it together to understand like, why didn't they go for it? If they did, what failed? And then like eventually realize like, actually there's an opportunity here. And like, it's hard, but let's try it.
That's really interesting that you then talk to people who have similar visions or ambitions, but didn't follow up on them, or others who tried, but it didn't work out. Because if no one else is doing or tackling that space, it could also be that it's just not a good space to go in, right?
That's right, man.
So you did your due diligence.
I mean, you do it as best as you can, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Obviously, like, you're not going to know for sure. You do it. I even talked to Marius Kreis, who's one of the founders of Ilona, which is the company that Bexio bought and plugged in, and also trying to understand because he had the same vision, right? He wanted to do like the gusto of Switzerland, and then like blow it up there. But yeah, I guess I don't want to go into the details of what happened there, but yeah, like just you want to try and gather as much perspective, as much insight as possible before you kick off a venture.
And then you reach the conclusion, hey, it's actually a good space to go in.
And that's the question. It's like, when is that conclusion? Like, because you could do that search forever.
Of course.
Right? Yeah. Eventually, you just got to rip the bandage and go. Yeah. And so that's like, that's when we felt, all right, let's just do it. And then that's when we ripped it.
What convinced you specifically? Did it just set a time frame for you to reach a conclusion, or were there any specific points that you learned along the process that then really convinced you to take the leap?
So the thing what convinced me was I wasn't learning too much more new things by talking to people. Yeah. So I stopped getting new information. And so it was really recurring. And eventually it was like, I could keep doing this, but I'm probably going to learn only incrementally more than what I already know.
Right.
So at that point, it was just like, it was decision time.
Yeah.
Like that was it. So yeah, that's the journey, I guess.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So can you talk a bit more how payroll is actually done on Ernie?
On Ernie?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I could tell you let me kind of just actually go back and say like, in Switzerland, there's like 3 ways to do payroll. Let me just kind of break that down first. I'll tell you how we do it on Ernie.
Of course.
So you can do it yourself in Switzerland, right? As an SME, like a small, medium company, you can do it yourself. You can go out and use one of the software stacks out there, but you need payroll experience. I mean, if you ever try to run your own payroll, you're going to be on the blogs, you're going to be on the internet searching, what should I add for insurance? What should I add for pension? What is withholding tax or Quellensteuer? Yes. Like you're going to be all over the place trying to figure out that stuff out, right? So that's the first option. And you're prone to error, right? Because you're a newbie. The second option is you can use an accountant, but they charge you anywhere between 30 and 60 francs per employee per month to run that payroll on average, right? I mean, some of the accountants might be like, I don't charge that much, but on average. Yeah. And on top of that, you end up doing a lot of the work yourself. So you gather all the documentation for the insurance, you send it to them by email. They send you back like PDFs in Excel so you can fill in, and then they retype that data into their software.
Sounds very inefficient.
Yeah, so it's super archaic, right? And then the third option is you can hire somebody internally, but if you're small, you just don't do that.
Right.
Because it's just an additional expense on your payroll. And when you get medium to the medium size, what we saw is like they hire someone internally and that internal person uses an accountant. So it's like double the cost.
Wow.
So yeah, so it was really deadly. So with Ernie, pretty much our value prop is like anyone can run payroll, no previous payroll experience needed. Mm-hmm. So we calculate like your withholding tax code for you, for example, if you have a Quellensteuer person, right?
Right.
We kind of already automate the information that comes in from the employee. So if they move or change an address or have a child, that's incorporated into the payroll. So we're trying to automate that process so that basically you don't have to do any manual work, any retyping of that data. Yeah. And if you want to still use an accountant on Ernie, you can still do so. Like you can still invite the accountant.
Okay.
So like we try and take the need for knowledge out of payroll and let like Ernie guide you through that flow and through that step. And we remove email and Excel, and we give everybody an interface, right? So employees get an interface.
Nice.
Like accountants get an interface and companies get an interface, and they feed data centrally into this like one, I say nucleus, which then runs your payroll. Like
fantastic.
That's Ernie pretty much, man.
And I guess you also have a business case where you say to potential customers, the companies that use your service, that's how much money you can save with our solution.
Yeah. So there is we're still pinning that out, right? Like we're still in the early days, right. I would say. But I mean, on average, like I said, accountants charge you anywhere between 30 and 60 francs per employee per month. We charge you 10 francs, so we're like a third of the cost, right? And if you like extrapolate that across the year or like multiple years, right? Like an LTV, like on a payroll product is huge, right? It's like on average, like our hypothesis is like 8 to 9 years, so it's very long, right? So I would say, it's like we're trying to be like a third of the cost, I would say, of whether you want to use an accountant. And if you want to do it yourself, right, we save you costs in the sense that like we save you time. Like you don't have to go out searching for stuff, like trying to understand things. We save you like worry as well. So we save you more on the time and worry aspect, I would say, if you're doing it yourself.
Right.
And so that's kind of like where I would say the savings come in, time and cost.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, of course, I also want to talk about some challenges and obstacles that you face. I think there's plenty of stuff that we can talk about. The first one is about the issue itself, the problem. So I know you mentioned the 3 different ways of how you can do payroll today as a company. And, for most companies, I can imagine maybe it's not the best solution that they have in place, but somehow it's working. So I wonder, is the pain point big enough that they would even consider an alternative solution like Ernie?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we get this question all the time too. So if you're like an SME, you just have like a monthly salary that you run, and you're already set up on like a software stack somewhere or on Excel or whatever. We don't propose you change, right? Unless you're super unhappy. Like we just say, go on your way. Yeah. You're good. But if you're like an SME who's about to grow really, really fast, like onboard a lot of employees, and kind of your payroll is going to get more complicated over time. Mm-hmm. We do recommend like ripping that bandage and going with us pretty much, because we can kind of support you and save you a lot more time over time as you get those employees. And on top of that too, if you have recurring monthly changes, so if you have hourly employees, or if you have like bonuses that you pay out on a monthly basis, or if if you just want to be really tight on your payroll, kids are born and you want to get that ahead of time, report it. That pretty much we recommend the switch in Ernie. But if you're monthly, you're set up, not too many changes in a month, you're not going to grow, you're not going to hire anybody throughout the year.
Right. Stay
the way you are, man. You can make the switch if you truly want, but we're not going to convince you. You're good to go.
So in that regard, you mainly focus on either companies that are just starting out, that don't have any solution in place at all yet, or companies that really hit that next growth level where things change and then they also need to consider a different setup.
Yeah, exactly. That's going to focus.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And then, talking about focus, in the end, you actually have to acquire B2B clients. And I can imagine, especially here in Switzerland, right, the SMEs, they can be quite a tough cookie to crack.
Totally.
Especially if you don't speak Swiss German. That's what I always hear from other companies saying. So,
yeah, totally.
First of all, has this ever been a challenge for you? And second of all, how do you actually solve that?
Yeah, so we're in the stage now where we're in the early adopter stage, right? Yep. That's where we are. So in the early adopter stage, the guys who are going to kind of sign up, the SMEs are going to sign up, are going to speak some level of English. Because they're the early adopters, they're more open, and kind of they're more willing to have the conversations. And so English hasn't been an issue in the early adopter curve. Mm-hmm. Once you get over the early adopter curve, you go to mass market, or you even start to edge into the mass market. Yeah. That's where you got to get a Swiss German speaking guy for sure. We already have a French speaking guy from the Romandie region, so he's set up. Yeah. We got to get an Italian speaking guy. That's where you got to get localized, right? Yeah. I think once you get into that match, but your early adopter curve, it's okay. I think at that point. So English hasn't been, it's a great question, by the way, because I don't speak German, obviously. But yeah, English hasn't been an issue, I would say, in the early adopter phase. No. But it will be, almost definitely, because there are customers who I speak to where they want to speak German. Mm-hmm. And at that point, Dan, who's my co-founder, he basically will speak to them, right? Because they just don't speak, speak English. But you get the odd case, but overall, the early adopters are mostly English speaking.
Got it. If you need to build a great website design or would like to upgrade your existing site, Tasnadi & Co. are a digital agency with expertise in building websites fast and efficiently. I can tell you from my personal experience working with them at RentTouch that they have an incredibly competent and responsive team. The tool they use is Webflow, a no-code website builder with growing popularity. And this means you get a clean code and no restrictions on how the website looks. Your design can be customized to exactly how you envision it, unlike what happens with theme-based website builders. It's also very easy and cost-effective to maintain, edit, and expand your site. And you can have a simple website up and running in a week for a very reasonable fee. Go to tasnadi.net/webflow to find out more. Again, that's tasnadi.net/webflow. And what do you think? How long will that early adopter phase last? Do you have a specific number in your head where you say, hey, these are the early adopters, and then we need to actually ramp up the sales team to also have the local language skills? Or what do you think about that?
Wow, man, that's a solid question. So when the early adopter curve ends and when the mass market starts, right? Man, that is that's like telling me when is your product going to be the perfect product for product market fit? It's sure. It's like the ultimate question. I don't got a number, to be honest with you. All I know is that as soon as I start seeing more and more of these requests that are coming in where the guys are speaking with a strong German accent or a strong French accent, right. I see a lot more of these. Yeah. then I'm going to basically realize, okay, maybe it's time. We get them, obviously, but the guys are willing to speak English, like, surprisingly.
Nice.
We get them, but it's not as obvious. So I think when I start to see more volume in terms of like, in terms of like what comes through the pipeline, then I'll know that maybe we're past the early adopter phase now.
But no, I think that's a perfect statement to that question, because in theory, you always see these concepts, right? When then switch from one phase to the next phase. But in reality, that's not black and white. That's a gray area where you never know where you exactly stand. And I think what you just mentioned, once the pain point becomes big enough that it can't handle, or that you actually eventually lose inbound customers due to the language restrictions, then it's time to ramp up, but not before that.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think that's a very fair assessment.
Yeah, in the startup world, you never want to like presume anything or assume something too fast, right? You want to, but you also need to be agile enough to like, fill the demand as soon as it comes in. So I don't want to make any moves there until I know for sure, right?
That's perfect. And also talking about your business model. So obviously you have a subscription-based business model. If we look at it, you have per client approximately a low 4-digit ARR at the moment. Do you think that this is, enough to actually build a sustainable business? Because you also need to talk to them. You talked about a sales team. So usually that deal size might seem too low from the outside to actually build a sustainable business model with a sales team. Yeah,
I mean, that's a great question, right? So I mentioned earlier, LTV is pretty long, right? So LTV, like we basically suspect, we also did some studies maybe on Gusto, see kind of what their LTV was. We think like 7-8 years is like the LTV on a bad payroll product. Yeah. Okay.
And that's even a lot more than a regular SaaS product, right?
Yeah, I know. Yeah. But you know how it is, like payroll, like you're locked in, right? When you're in, you get comfortable. Yeah. It's like a nice couch. You're not going anywhere. So I would say on that part, LTV is pretty good. But yeah, you're right? It's still the 4-digit ARR. It's like low, right? Like a 10 employee company will only generate like $1,200 for us, right? Throughout the year. Yeah. That's kind of the way it is. But so we'll basically, we're basically still working out what our CAC is, like our cost of acquisition. We're still working that out. But we're also like noticing too that there's more, there's like potential in not just like monetizing on payroll. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. Like we saw already scenarios where we have companies signing up with us and we basically see their insurance rates. So it's like same company, same industry, same number of employees. And I see two companies the same, by the way, two companies the exact same, yet the insurance rates for one company is like astronomically higher than the other one, right? And then when I go to like our insurance partner and I ask him like, what's going on here? He says like, yeah, it's the black box. It's like being taken advantage of and like you never change your insurance. So there's like areas to monetize, I would say, beyond just on the payroll part. I mean, for sure, we're seeing that already. Like we're also seeing profiles not just on company but also on employees, right? So we're seeing like employees like different pensions and stuff like that, and we're thinking, what's going on here? Why are these guys getting different pensions, same age, same like profile? I'm thinking to myself, how is that even possible? But anyway, so we're seeing additional areas of monetization, I would say, beyond just I would say payroll, that we're going to investigate it further. But to counteract like the yearly low digit ARR, it's like we're getting to a point where we're building a product that's like, trying to get as automated as possible, least amount of customer support as possible, right? So like, there's still customer support needed and there's always going to be. But like if you can kind of like reduce that, we already had some customers like sign up and do a whole self-service thing, but we saw errors in their onboarding. And that was like, I would say, another thing we're trying to solve as well. Not just the fact that they go through the process, but how do you mitigate the errors? So listen, it's a combination of like improving your product, so that's like self-service, but then also identifying like monetization areas that are just like beyond whatever your core offering is.
Right.
Like that's I would say our plan to kind of, I would say, mitigate the low ARR.
And therefore, while ideally keeping the same customer acquisition costs, increasing the ARR and lifetime value, right?
Yeah. If you could do that, definitely. Yeah,
another thing that you could consider is going international. So what are your thoughts on that? Is that anything that you plan to do?
That's like the $1 trillion question. Like, do you know, like, okay, so the Gusto doesn't operate in this market, right? Imagine them having to do like AHV or Quellensteuer. Yeah. Like, hell no. Like figuring out how to make your payroll product go international is like the holy grail in the payroll space. To give you an example, there's a company in France called Payfit. Okay. They raised like 280 million. They do what we do pretty much in France. They raised 280 million in funding just in January, like this month. And they're now targeting like the German markets, the Spanish markets. And so what you do when you go into a new market, you rebuilding your back end.
So, you have to. It's so different. Like it's a really local problem that you solve.
Yeah, exactly. So you got to rebuild the back end. So what you try to do, so they're trying to rebuild their back end, and we're already hearing whispers from customers in Germany saying like it's incomplete. I have to ask them if I can hire an employee before I hire them. There's like, it's a terrible experience. And on average, it takes like 12 to 18 months to build out that back end to cover the edge cases and everything. And so going international requires like a full back end rebuild, right? And then the other question is what we always get from investors: why don't you just buy a payroll company?
Sure, that would have been my next question.
Yeah, okay, yeah, exactly. So why don't you just buy a payroll company, right? So it's like, okay, so you know a company called Personio in Germany?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
So like Personio tried that. They bought like a payroll engine in Spain,
Okay.
right? Called Rollbox or Rollbox. I always get those confused with the education startup. Anyway, so they bought it, and their idea was, all right, we're just gonna like tweak a few numbers and make it set up for the German market.
Yeah.
When they started to do that, and they're trying to connect it to their front end, it just like wasn't working. Like it just like so at the end of the day, they wrote off the investment, and they just like didn't even go for it. They're still building out the team in Spain, so that's okay. But yeah, they just wrote out the investment. And so our approach is a bit different. So in our technological approach on how to scale markets. Okay, so we bought a payroll engine in Switzerland. Okay, and so the way it works, and we're building like a middle layer. Okay, so the way it works is basically like this middle layer that we're building is like an absorbent. So like we are basically building all the automation, all like the smart logic in the middle layer, and the back-end engine just as a calculator. Imagine just like a calculator where you just throw numbers in and they give you the right numbers back. And so the idea is that like this absorbent middle layer could potentially be used to reabsorb another back-end that we potentially purchase in other markets, right? Whatever that market may be, Germany, France, whatever it is, right? And then so what that would then do is it would accelerate your go-to-market significantly, right? Yeah. So, we're solving a problem, but we're also thinking, like we're solving a short-term problem, but we're also thinking like down the road, like how do you scale this? How do you solve the scale problem in payroll? Yeah. And how do you do it in a smart way technically? Because that's really the challenge. It's a technological challenge. Yeah. And so that's kind of like our approach to, I would say, solving that scale problem. We don't know if it works yet, by the way.
Of course, hypothesis. Yeah. But if it works, that will give you a really unfair advantage over all the other companies out there, because then you are way more flexible, if I understood that correctly.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we're already getting like, so there's a couple guys in Germany, like, I'm not going to say who they are, but they're interested in like seeing how this little experiment of ours pans out, pretty much. Yeah. Because, I mean, like if it does pan out, you basically have found like you could accelerate your go-to-market. It could be like 3 to 6 months instead of 12 to 18. Right. So your go-to-market super faster, and you got like a real, like you got a good base, right? You have a product that has been in the market, it's stable. It's a calculator that's gonna, if you put 2 plus 2, it's gonna give you 4. So you know what you're gonna get out of that calculator. So yeah, we feel pretty. We don't know if it works, but that's our technological approach to it. But
amazing.
We'll let you know.
Sure.
When we try.
We'll talk. We'll do another episode about the exit. Sure. Okay.
Yeah, sure.
But in that regard, if you had to go to another market, what would you choose then? Would you prefer to buy an existing company that already has clients and the software in place where you didn't just connect that to your middle layer and to the back end? Or would you prefer to start a new market from scratch with your approach to ensure that it really works?
I think we're probably going to buy. We want to test that hypothesis. Sure. We want to test buying. So we want to identify like a legacy app in a new market, like one that's working. Mm-hmm. And there's certifying bodies, by the way, in every market that tries to certify payroll. There's one in Switzerland as well, and there's one in Germany. And so we want to buy some kind of certified, I would say, application, and then we want to test this hypothesis, right? Because the go-to-market's like it's like a 12-month accelerated go-to-market. Exactly. And that's kind of the reason why we want to try it. And then like if you can prove that hypothesis, it also makes us very attractive for like massive fundraise rounds, right?
Absolutely.
So that's kind of
Yeah, I already see the fundraising story playing out. We're going to build the biggest one in Europe, etc.
Everyone's talking like that, right? Like we're going to be the biggest centicorn ever, and
exactly.
Everyone talks like that, but got to stay grounded.
Sure. And at the same time, if you think about your growth engine, you actually have now 2 ways of doing it, right? You can go and purchase existing companies or tools out there in other markets to expand geographically. But you can also, as you mentioned before, try to increase the ARR and lifetime value of existing customers here in Switzerland.
That's right.
I guess you probably would have to choose one to focus on. You cannot do both at the same time in a very good way. So if you had to make a choice, what would you go for?
Yeah, I think it's more of a timing question, I would say.
Right.
So, right, it's like Amazon does everything, right? But it's a timing question. It's like, when did they do what when, right?
Yeah.
And so I think for us, it's a timing question and what we do first and what we do second. I think if we're going to focus on the home market, like for sure, that's our initial focus. That's the promise we've made to this market, the customers we have. Like, we're not going to go to another market unless we know this market's solid and it's okay and it's running functionally. We're never going to reallocate resources for expansions if we don't know this market's good, right? Yeah. And so that's our primary focus. So if I was going to choose, I would, like, right now, hypothetically speaking, I chose to take care of the guys we have here, right, in the Swiss market, make sure this market's okay. That's number one. And then if there's like excess capital to experiment in other markets, excess capital, who has excess capital? If you have like if you have a plan and you identify like a solid entry strategy in a new market, maybe additional capital could be allocated to that. But definitely, like, not at the expense of hurting this market. And not at the expense of providing additional value to our customers in this market. No way, man.
No.
It's not worth it.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So you raised your 1 million round from Polytech Ventures and others recently. Yeah. You also have more refined products in the works for 2022. So what can users expect? What can you already share with us what you have in the making?
What we're working on now. Oh man, like 2022 is all about like trying to automate the product as much as possible, right? It's trying to make it as hands-off as possible for us, like, and as automated and simple from a customer perspective. So we launched the beta in November, right? Mm-hmm. And so we've been collecting feedback like crazy. We had feedback before with like a few private beta customers, and then like once you go public, it's when you really get like a ridiculous amount of feedback. So it's all about like understanding how to incorporate that feedback into a product that is as self-service and automated as possible with little CS support as possible. Yeah. Right? So I'll give you one example, like adding insurance rates into a payroll product. Like 1 out of like 50 companies will get this correct, like to put the right rates in. They just like don't know how to add the rates, man. And so like we're looking at like, how do we automate that? Can we work with insurance companies to where someone puts in a customer and a contract number, where it's just automatically there? Like that is like the core product focus is like what we need to do in 2022. Mm-hmm. And then like we can look into some like fancy stuff. We already had like customers say like, hey, can I pay a portion of my employee salaries in crypto or something like that?
Right.
I'll get something like that. And I'll be like, I mean, it sounds very interesting, right? It's like it's like a second pillar, right? In Switzerland,
of course.
It's like you can use it as a store of value. So we get those comments sometimes, and you get a bunch of like interesting ideas that come from your customer base, but you can't derail you from the core product right now and making that really rock solid. Just minimizing your support needs and making just like the best product for the core customer right now.
Great. I think that's a very good focus to have.
Yeah, man. So you have to do it.
So one other thing on a personal level, you actually also started investing in Swiss startups.
Yeah.
So, you came here as a foreigner, and I know from other people telling me that coming to Switzerland as a foreigner is not the easiest thing because our society, so to speak, is a bit more closed. So it's quite difficult to make connections, to meet new people. So first of all, how did you experience that? Was that ever a challenge for you to actually find some connections and other people here in Switzerland to eventually also work with?
So it was a bit harder, I would say. Obviously, it's all about your personality, right? Like, if you're more outgoing, and you're like constantly seeking out specific areas of interest of yours, like you're going to meet other people with similar interests. But obviously, like if you do that in Silicon Valley, maybe if you're interested in startups and you do it in Silicon Valley versus if you do it in Switzerland, there might be a bit of like different reception, right? Slightly different reception, right? So I would say like, for sure, like that's like in the Swiss, I say going kind of the Swiss where there was definitely some. Yeah, I mean, it was a bit harder, I would say, a bit colder, but eventually, like, you kind of crack through it and, like, you meet the right people, and then they introduce you to more people, and then, like, you get involved with more things, and like, a great way is obviously, like, money talks, right? So if you want to invest some money into a couple startups, people get to know you, that this guy invests in some early-stage startups, and eventually it snowballs, and eventually, like, that's always a great way, right, if you have capital. And if all you have is, like, skill and interest, you still can do that, right? You go like Blue Line has some great events, F10, like just go to a few events. They're free and you can go and meet people. And so that's kind of how you start. It's like you started with these like maybe events to get to know a few people, and then like you make one investment leads to another maybe investment, or you provide some advisory work for one startup that then snowball into another startup. So that's like I would say the I mean, there's no science to it. It's just like you just got to have this kind of outgoing, positive spirit. Yeah. That's all it is, man.
That certainly helps.
Yeah, man.
But it's also really just all about getting started. Like take baby steps, but make these steps, right?
Yeah, exactly. Just start. Exactly. Like just start something.
And coming from the outside, Switzerland also has sort of a bad reputation for being too expensive, for not being the best, place to invest your money into startups. So that's probably the outside picture that you got. How do you then perceive reality once you got there of Switzerland being too expensive? Accurate or not accurate?
I mean, from a personal consumption perspective, yeah, man, Switzerland's expensive. I mean, there's no doubt about that. From like an investment perspective, I'd say like you could get into some startups here pretty cheap, I would say, because it's like a lesser known market, right? It's like the same with the emerging markets. So I have some investments also in the emerging markets. You get in pretty cheap, right? Because they're lesser known markets. There's less competition for, to getting dollars and stuff. So you can get in pretty cheap, I would say. There is this like maybe perception that like your returns aren't as big here in Switzerland versus like if you had made the similar kind of investment in the United States or right? It maybe because it's market size or maybe it's because I mean, could be market, but a lot of these startups are also like they can go international, right? So there's also that perception. But for me, it's like coming into this market, investing in this market, it's more just like I met some really cool guys and girls, right? And yeah, they're just really smart. They're really motivated. I believed in what they were doing, regardless of like nationality, Switzerland, U.S. Like the investment just like made sense from that standpoint. And yeah, that's kind of the way I've assessed it so far. We'll see if any of them pan out.
So that sounds like a good balance between people who are very serious about their own startups and companies. So you do have a certain safety there, but you of course also if the investment have the upside. So you might have a bit more safety because people are really serious. And although the lower upside might be justified due to the market size, etc., it still seems to be in a good balance.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the guys who start companies here are very serious. Like, it's not just off a whim.
Exactly.
And if it doesn't work out, they're really reminiscing and thinking about what they've done, and like they're not just back at it again. So I'd say like it's a much more serious attempt at a venture in Switzerland, I would say, versus the US, right? Or any other market, I would say. Plus, like the capital requirements to get in, right? Just to form an AG here, you need like $50K in capital.
True.
And like takes about a month to incorporate, and like in the US, it's like you can just incorporate an LCC or a C corp with like nothing at all, and like start. That's it. You're done. Like, and you're off to the races, right? And no liability. And here it's like when you decide to pursue a venture, it's a serious venture. It's not like it's not taken lightly. Yeah.
And it also sounds that investing into startups is a really great way of getting a foot in the door in the ecosystem, just the way that you did it.
Oh, I mean, definitely, right? If you come in with money, I mean, the doors are going to open for you. That's how it is, right? For sure. I mean, definitely. You have capital and you want to invest, and there's definitely opportunity here to get into that startup ecosystem. And if you don't, right, I want to address the other problem. Like, if you don't have money, right, how do you then get into, a lot of guys come here, they don't have money, and they just like want to get into the ecosystem, right? Yeah, I mean, the best way, like, you just go to these kind of like incubator events and community events. Like Spoon over here will hold a couple events with like, I think Yoiko was there a few weeks ago. And so, just go to the events, get to know the guys, get to know the people, and then pretty much like try and offer your services, like whatever that may be. I mean, everyone has a skill, so whatever that may be. And then, just kind of that's how you bridge it in. But if you have capital, go the capital route. If you don't,
fast track.
It's a fast track, definitely. If you don't, then you could always do it the old-fashioned way. Interest and skill.
Got it.
Yeah.
So to wrap up this episode, I want to also ask you about your personal resources and gadgets recommendations. What can you recommend to our listeners? Maybe even something that you use yourself on a regular basis.
Oh, like a resource to help grow the business, or like personal resource?
Could be anything that makes your life easier, that really helped you along in the past. Can be books, blogs, podcasts, whatever.
Oh man, like I'm a massive podcaster. Like that's all I do. Like I listen to you guys. I listen to All In pretty much as well. Nice. In the US. I really like. I I listen to like a lot of Gary Vee, unfortunately, on NFT. Anything on NFT, I'm going nuts on right now. So yeah, I'm a pretty big podcaster, I would say, in that sense. Yeah, that's kind of where I mostly gather my information, I would say, from a resource perspective.
Fantastic.
Yeah, man.
And for the very last part, we prepared some rapid fire questions for you. So I either give you different options to choose from or a short question, and you have to explain your choice in one sentence.
All right, I like that.
You ready?
All right, I like that. Go for it, yeah.
What does money mean to you?
Man, this is not a rapid fire question. Like, money is like a tool in order to enact change. That's the way I see money, right?
Perfect.
You need it to do that change. Go ahead. Yep.
Yeah. And you actually also wrote a book, so author or founder?
Man, if I could, author.
Really?
Yeah, if I could. You don't even, like, yeah, it's like an escapism. Like, I write sci-fi. It's just an escapism, man. You just like, yeah. If I could, right? I'm not that good of an author, though. I think I'm a better founder, but I don't know yet. We'll see.
Future will tell.
We'll see.
Where do you actually go to think?
Long walks. Like, just like endless walks where my wife calls me and yells at me because I've been gone for too long.
Hey, you're still alive.
Yeah, exactly.
What do you prefer, fixing your own problems or look for other problems to solve?
Other problems. I don't have that many problems, man. We live in Switzerland.
No.
I mean, what we got here? Like, other problems, for sure. Yeah.
Great. And the last one, Canada, Denmark, or Switzerland?
Oh, man, the Swiss are going to hate me. It's all about, I mean, I'm Canada obsessed. I'm Canadian, so.
That's all right.
I love Switzerland. It's great. But if I'm honest, I mean, yeah. There's a lot of similarities between Canada and Switzerland. But, I mean, I have so many years in Canada, that's why.
Of course.
But big Switzerland fan, just so everyone knows.
So Canadian at heart, but a big fan of Switzerland.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, man.
Fantastic. Bassil, thank you so much for stopping by. It was a pleasure talking to you, and lots of success with Ernie and whatever you're tackling or investing into future.
Thanks, Dylan. Appreciate you having me on, man.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, you can support us by rating our show on Apple Podcasts. This way, we can reach an ever-growing number of aspiring entrepreneurs.